Hello, I'm James Quandt. Hiroshi Teshigahara called his gravely underrated feature film debut Pitfall a documentary fantasy, which sounds a bit like an oxymoron, but Pitfall actually combines many seemingly contradictory modes and genres: ghost story, social realism, political critique, allegory, investigative procedural, murder mystery, conspiracy thriller, and yes, both documentary and fantasy. It's one of those first features, like those of the French New Wave directors, that bursts with long-nurtured visual and narrative ideas. Teshigahara doesn't have control of all of the film's many shifts and switches, but Pitfall's power and audacity make up for its occasionally erratic tone. Teshigahara certainly found a more precise and concentrated method in his next film, The Legendary Woman in the Dunes, but in some ways I prefer the slightly pell-mell quality of Pitfall. Its strange conflation of modes and its daring shuttle between various strands of narrative look forward to the experimentation of Face of Another. But again, I think Pitfall has a kind of heartfelt urgency lacking in that later film. The film's urgency derives from many factors. Teshigahara was finally getting to make a fiction feature after a series of short documentaries he made in the 50s, which ranged in subject from the great Japanese woodblock artist Hokusai to the heavyweight boxer Jose Torres. So there's a sense of pent-up aesthetic energy being loosed in the film. The urgency was also political. Teshigahara's friends and colleagues, many of them artists and most of them leftists or radicals, were caught up in the political turmoil of the time and had either witnessed or participated in the Tokyo demonstrations in 1960 against AMPO, as the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty was known. The emphasis in Pitfall on the exploitation of coal miners and the struggle between the unions which ostensibly represent them therefore reflects the political sympathies of both Teshigahara and his friend, novelist Kobo Abe. Pitfall was the first of 4 collaborations between Teshigahara and Kobo Abe, but where the subsequent 3 films they worked on together, Woman in the Dunes, Face of Another, and Man Without a Map, are all derived from Abe novels, Pitfall was taken from an Abe play that had been broadcast on television about coal miners in Kyushu. It's a measure of their success that despite its theatrical source and the fact that many of the actors in central roles were from the theater, Pitfall is triumphantly cinematic. Teshigahara once made the self-deprecating claim that his talents were that of a cameraman, and his work with the cinematographer Hiroshi Sagawa reveals meticulous attention to composition and camera movement. From the opening sequences, in which an inky tracking shot captures the desperate flight of the miner, his young son, and a friend, and the still shocking interpolation of actual documentary footage of the starvation, hard labor, and mine disasters that constituted the lives of coal workers, through the striking use of superimpositions, circular and swish pans, unusual fades, handheld follow shots, zoom and freeze-frame close-ups, risky long takes with great swaths of dialogue, the use of truncated or tensile framing, and the final ambiguous traveling shots of the little boy escaping through the empty streets of the ghost town. Pitfall's visual command was as remarkable as it was hard-won. Produced by Teshigahara's own company, the film was shot over 50 days in ferocious heat. None of the copious sweat we see in the film had to be faked, and made with a very small crew, some of whom questioned the director's every decision. Dori Ashton reports in her book The Delicate Thread that 2 assistant directors quit when Teshigahara insisted on the sequence in which the policeman has sex with the shopkeeper, a scene they found outrageous and arbitrary. The elegance and complexity of the film's visual plan, with its masterful use of deep focus, seems all the more miraculous, given the low budget, the isolated rugged location, the artistic disputes, and the director's combination of perfectionism and lack of experience. Teshigahara, like many of his artistic confrères in post-war Japan, who were searching for new forms to express their anti-conformist, anti-militarist vision, was influenced by such Western aesthetic movements as Dada and Surrealism. You can see the influence of Cocteau's surrealist classic Blood of a Poet, for instance, in the reverse motion shot used to resurrect the miner, or at least his ghost, after he's murdered. Traveling in Spain in the late 50s to study the architecture of Antonio Gaudi, Teshigahara met Salvador Dali, surrealist supremo, who of course had collaborated with Luis Buñuel. Buñuel's films were a great inspiration to Teshigahara, and one can certainly see the Spanish master's influence in Pitfall. In, for example, the insistent pattern of animal and insect imagery, the dog that's threatened with becoming stew, the sidewinding snake, the ants drowned or crawling on pastries in the shop, the tadpole the little boy smashes, flays, and leaves hanging on a pole, the crustacean trapped on a line, and the pack of wild, presumably feral dogs that dot the skyline towards the end of the film, echoing the image of miner and son walking the crest of the hill as they enter the village. The dogs in particular recall the film that greatly influenced Pitfall, Buñuel's 1950 classic Los Olvidados, a harsh portrait of Mexican street urchins. Teshigahara was obviously affected by the ferocity of Buñuel's pitiless social vision, and by the way he mixed documentary-like realism with surrealist and dream imagery. To say that Pitfall is a black and white film is to state the obvious, but rarely has the contrast between the two been so central to a film's visual design. The black slag heaps and dark brooding hills of Kyushu have as powerful a presence in Pitfall as do the dunes in Teshigahara's next film. One finds burning slag heaps in Teshigahara's early short film, Tokyo 1958, so it was obviously an important metaphor for him. In one of Pitfall's most striking moments, there's a disjuncture of sound and image as the assassin instructs the shopkeeper on what she is to tell the police about the murder she has witnessed, while the camera locks on a stationary shot of a hill as sun and clouds scud over its dark surface. The implacable indifference of nature and the callous cruelty of humans are simultaneously conjured in this brilliant uncoupling of image and sound. It seemed at first glance that Teshigahara, perhaps taking a page from Melville's Moby Dick, inverted the usual iconography of white, where it represents innocence and purity, and instead used it to suggest the opposite: venality, corruption, authority, the void. In making this, as it turns out, specious supposition, I had in mind the white clothes and hat of the farmer who exploits the miners at the beginning of the film, the police photographers in their white smocks, the white slip that the shopkeeper spends much of her time in, and most obviously the natty white suit, and at different times the white gloves, shoes, and socks of the assassin. Added to this is the matter of white light, which in the film is always ominous, associated with death or danger, the blinding white light of the bicycle in the opening sequence, the flash of sunlight that attends the miner being stabbed, the hot white light above the slag heaps, and as the dead miner first comes back to town to find that he can't be seen or heard, the white light coursing down as the little boy lies in the grass after witnessing the sex between the shopkeeper and the policeman, the swallowing light that frames the ghost of the shopkeeper as she stands at her door, and the corona of white light that burns around the head of the dead miner at the end as he rues the eternal hunger to which he has been condemned. But like much else in this compact, complex film, things are not so simple or schematic. The union officials also wear white, for instance, as do some of the ghosts. And the shopkeeper, as venal as she is, turns out not to be a villain, but the kind of grasping, carnal woman survivor who Shohei Imamura celebrated in his films. "I wanted money," she states bluntly when explaining her duplicity. There's a stunning reminder of the mirror imagery in Kobo Abe's writing, in that wonderful moment when she inspects herself in a tiny square looking glass, and unlike his men, looks pleased with what she sees. The sex scene, verging on rape, is shot Imamura style, the violence of the policeman's attack coming to rest on a powerfully truncated shot of the woman's bare, splayed leg, the policeman's clothed one with weapon, and an oddly redundant umbrella. Later their sex is shot so that it's difficult to discern whose limb is whose flesh is whose, and Teshigahara then resorts to a favorite Imamura overhead shot of the scene, the intervening slats turning us into voyeurs. Speaking of Imamura, who by the way also made a film about impoverished coal miners and the unions in Kyushu called My Second Brother in 1959, I think Pitfall shares one of his signature motifs, spying, looking, voyeurism. Teshigahara does not frame his shots quite as emphatically as Imamura does in such films as The Pornographers, to implicate the audience in the sense of voyeurism. But there are enough compositions in Pitfall that frame space to elicit our consciousness of looking, just as the mutely watchful boy stares at incidents, many of them horrific, from a distance, or the lurking assassin spies on his victims and takes pictures, and the shopkeeper is literally caught looking, which draws her into the assassin's scheme and ultimately to her own death. "You were watching that, weren't you?" the killer asks her, and by extension asks us. Two twinned images foreground this motif. First, that unnerving close-up of an eye peering through a hole in a wooden fence that is suddenly, inexplicably inserted into the reporter's interview with the union secretary. The image is soon revealed to be that of the boy spying on the shopkeeper and policeman having sex. Later, when Toyama arrives at the shop and spies through the wall at his rival Otsuka and the dead woman, his approach is introduced by two disorienting upside-down aperture shots. These rhyme shots of spying powerfully punctuate the film's pattern of surveillance. Pitfall introduces a number of images and motifs that will turn up in subsequent Teshigahara films. The men in their useless hauling of soil out of the hole after the credit sequence looks forward to the physical struggle in Woman in the Dunes. The three masks in the candy seller's shop foreshadow the masks that turn up in Dunes and Face of Another. Pitfall also employs a structural motif of doubling, much more subtle than it would become in Face of Another. For instance, the bus conductor offering the little boy a caramel obviously prepares for the shopkeeper and her stale candy. In turn, the boy's attempt to steal a treat from the latter foreshadows his ransacking of her stock after she is dead. The close-up of the spreading bloodstain on the miner's body is later recalled in that strange image of diffusing blood superimposed over the ghost town. And is it my imagination, but does that second stain not also suggest a Japanese rising sun, which seems to spread like a contagion? The tracking shots as the miner and his son enter the ghost town are echoed at the end of the film as the boy escapes, giving the film a classic symmetry of arrival and departure that is central to the genre of the Western. And I've already mentioned the twinned images of apertures and spying, as well as the doppelgangers of the miner and the union secretary, both of whom are stabbed to death at the abandoned pit, one at the beginning of the film, the other at the end, and in each case the boy witnesses the murder and inspects the corpse. No doubt the most prominent example of doubling in the film is that of the ghosts, who share the earth and the film's frames with their dead selves. In a boggling Hall of Mirrors instance, the frame encompasses the dead shopkeeper and her ghost as her spectral being speaks to the man she thinks is the murdered miner, but is really his live look-alike or double, the union secretary, who is inspecting her corpse but can't see or hear her ghost. This scene is soon surveyed by the dead miner himself, as well as the union secretary's rival, thereby incorporating two ghosts, one corpse, one look-alike, and two murder suspects. The ghosts in Pitfall have been frequently interpreted as a Greek chorus, commenting on the cruelty and futility of existence. But I think they can also be seen as an extreme expression of Kobo Abe's abiding theme of the divided self, which will also be so crucial in Face of Another. Pitfall's visual design depends on the interplay of proximity and distance, of close-up and long or landscape shot, sometimes abruptly abutted in the daring editing of Fusaku Morimichi. Far more than a stylistic affectation, this sometimes startling juxtaposition of close-up and far away can be read as a visual analogy for a central theme in the film. Indeed, in most of Abe and Teshigahara's work, the existential dilemma of the individual and the society in which he lives. More than mere figure and landscape, Teshigahara's shots embody the two poles of this philosophical quandary between the individual and the collective, the former alone, perhaps abandoned or alienated, but also desiring solidarity, connection, as the miner does here in wanting to belong to a union. Essential ties have been torn asunder in Pitfall, between employer and worker, individual and community, and especially between parent and child. The wife of the miner and mother of his son has presumably died from deprivation, and the wordless boy seems to hold little affection for his protective father. He unemotionally pulls the candy from his father's corpse and eats it, and ironically cries only over the death of his father's look-alike. It's as if he values the facsimile more than the actual, or can't tell the difference. What, then, has destroyed or perverted these traditional ties? Modernity, with its emphasis on individualism and freedom? Capitalism, which Teshigahara and Abe both reviled? The war, which is briefly invoked in a poster on the wall of the Itinerant Workers' Club? Pitfall withholds explanation, and its allegory leaves ambiguous the nature and motive of the white-suited assassin. He's been most frequently read as a figure of fate, a dispenser of destiny. But I wonder about Teshigahara's emphasis on his pristineness and precision. Exactly as planned, he declares with great satisfaction in his last line, as he lights a cigarette, oblivious to the tormented questions of the man and woman he's recently murdered. Teshigahara seems to share with Imamura a disdain, even hatred, of the hyper-rational, technical, and controlled. And I have to ask, is the assassin with his dapper suit, modish scooter, and phallic camera not just an agent of power and authority, but also an embodiment of the new technological Japan, born of the economic miracle of the 50s, that was now quickly advancing toward the 1964 Olympics, the country's virginal world debut after the devastation it had wrought in the war? A man and child wandering a desolate landscape brings to mind such Italian classics as The Bicycle Thieves and Il Grido, or the recent novel The Road by Cormac McCarthy. But the boy in Pitfall is not of that innocent lineage. Initially happy and playful, but soon aphasic, wary, traumatized, and seemingly unfeeling until his final outburst of weeping, the boy signals that the next generation carries forth the maladies of the previous. In his tattered straw hat and shorts, the boy is obviously vulnerable. But how innocent is he? I'll go out on a limb here and suggest that perhaps unintentionally, the boy and the assassin are paired throughout the film. The boy is the first to see the assassin in a zoom shot early in the film, lurking behind some posts, which I take to be grave markers. The men are obviously oblivious to the skulking killer. The boy next encounters the assassin on his scooter in the port town, indeed has to jump out of his way. Again, he is the only one who seems aware of his presence. And in one of the film's most troubling scenes, the boy impassively witnesses his father being brutally murdered by the assassin. In the final third of the film, there are two markedly rhymed shots, close-up of the boy's eyes and later of the assassin's, examples of both the doubling and voyeurism motifs I've spoken about earlier. And at the end of the film, only two figures make it out of town, the boy and the killer. I'm not suggesting an equivalence between boy and assassin, or even a kind of secret sharer sympathy between them. But I do think that, taken with the boy's flaying of the tadpole and his callous reaction to his father's death, the strange connection the film forges between these two figures makes the boy's escape at the end anything but hopeful, which is how it's always been interpreted as the innocent taking flight from evil. In this darkest of films, though, all hope seems occluded, and I wonder about that boy and the future into which he flees.